What if I told you that the secret to surviving unimaginable suffering is meaning? In the darkest corners of Auschwitz, where hope seemed lost and death was a daily companion, one man discovered a powerful truth: we can't always choose our circumstances, but we can always choose our response. This is the heart of man's search for meaning, a book that sold over 16 million copies and changed millions of lives. Written by Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, this short but life-altering book explores one haunting question: why do some people give up, while others hold on through the worst of humanity? If you've ever felt lost, numb, or stuck in the grind, Frankl's story will show you how suffering can be transformed into strength, not by escaping pain, but by finding purpose in it. In just a few minutes, we'll explore the key lessons that helped one man survive a nightmare and could help you live with more meaning. Right now, let's dive into man's search for meaning. Imagine being stripped of your name, your clothes, your family, and your future, all within a single day. This was the brutal beginning of life in a Nazi concentration camp for Viktor Frankl, a respected psychiatrist who would go on to survive the Holocaust and write one of the most powerful psychological books of all time, Man's Search for Meaning. In the first stage of camp life, Frankl describes the initial shock, the overwhelming disbelief and horror that hits the moment you're taken from everything you've ever known. Frankl recalls being transported in overcrowded cattle cars with no idea where they were going. When the doors opened, they were in Auschwitz. He saw the smoke from the crematorium, smelled burning flesh, and watched as guards pointed left or right, one direction for labor, the other for immediate death. It was in this moment, Frankl writes, that a strange detachment set in. The shock was too much for the human mind to fully grasp. Some prisoners clung to hope. Others shut down emotionally, unable to process the horror. Upon arrival, every prisoner was shaved, disinfected, and stripped of personal belongings, including wedding rings, photographs, even names. In their place, a number tattooed on the arm. Frankl describes this as the beginning of a new identity. You became a number. Dead to the world, dead to yourself. In this first phase, the human mind enters a state of denial and disbelief. Frankl calls it delusion of reprieve, the false hope that things won't be as bad as they seem, that a miracle might happen at the last second. Some prisoners, even as they were lined up for the gas chambers, believed they were simply being deloused or transferred. But very quickly, the truth shattered the illusion. Prisoners realized the only way to survive was to adapt fast. Emotions shut down. Feelings became a liability. Frankl noticed that in those first days, the only emotion stronger than fear was curiosity. Even he was fascinated by how people reacted. How did some manage to keep hope alive, while others collapsed almost instantly? The key, he would later discover, lay in one's ability to find meaning, even in the face of horror. But in this early stage, it was pure survival. Men who had once been doctors, teachers, musicians were now begging for scraps or risking their lives for a piece of bread. Frankl writes, the best of us did not return. And yet, he observed something remarkable. Even in this living hell, some men shared food, some whispered encouragement, some prayed. This first phase, the shock, was both a physical and spiritual stripping down. But it was also where Frankl began to understand something profound. When everything is taken from you, what remains is your ability to choose your attitude. That, he believed, is where true human freedom begins. After the initial shock of entering the concentration camp, a second psychological phase set in for most prisoners: apathy. Viktor Frankl describes this stage as a kind of emotional death. Once the mind could no longer process the horror and fear, it shut down. The constant anxiety turned into numbness. Pain became ordinary. Cruelty became routine. At this point, prisoners were no longer surprised by beatings, starvation, or death. They became passive observers of their own suffering. Seeing a corpse on the ground no longer caused alarm. Instead, they would check if the dead man had shoes or a piece of bread, items that might help them survive another day. Frankl writes that this apathy was a necessary defense mechanism. Without it, the constant trauma would overwhelm the human mind. But it came at a cost. It deadened every emotion, even the capacity to feel joy or sorrow. Prisoners stopped reacting to violence. They stopped asking questions. The outside world no longer felt real. Their only reality was survival, and even that felt mechanical. Food became an obsession. Every thought, every conversation, every moment revolved around the next meal. The portions were barely enough to keep someone alive. People would dream about bread, soup, or the meals they once had at home. Frankl recalls vividly how prisoners would lie awake at night, describing their favorite recipes to each other, as if that could offer some comfort. Sleep was another escape, but even rest came with suffering. The cold was unbearable. Blankets were shared among several men, and bodies were packed tightly on the wooden boards. Lice, illness, and random beatings were constant companions. One of the most tragic effects of this apathy was the loss of self-worth. When a person is treated like an animal, day after day, it's easy to begin believing you are one. Many prisoners gave up, not by choice, but by erosion. Their will to live dissolved slowly. Frankl explains that those who lost their inner purpose, who no longer saw a reason to endure, were often the first to die, not from the gas chambers, but from giving up. They would lie in bed, stop eating, stop moving, stop hoping. Within days, their bodies would follow. But Frankl noticed something else too. Those who could still find meaning, even a small one, were more likely to survive. Some thought of loved ones. Others clung to memories. A few dreamed of future work they hoped to complete. These thoughts acted as a kind of spiritual resistance, a force that kept the flame of life alive, even in the darkest conditions. He gives one powerful example. When he was forced to march in the freezing cold with torn shoes and an empty stomach, he focused entirely on his wife. He imagined talking to her, feeling her presence, and somehow, that gave him strength. Even though he didn't know whether she was alive or dead, the act of loving her gave him a purpose to endure. This was the difference between those who collapsed and those who continued, not physical strength, but mental and emotional purpose. In this second phase of camp life, Frankl came to believe that suffering, in itself, is meaningless, but how we respond to suffering is where meaning can be found. He wrote, "A man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears toward a human being who affectionately waits for him, will never be able to throw away his life." Even in a place designed to crush the human spirit, Frankl discovered that the mind still had the power to choose. And that choice, to keep going, to hold on to a reason, however small, was the most important one. Liberation, a word that should mean freedom, relief, even joy. But for Viktor Frankl and many others who survived the concentration camps, the moment of freedom was far more complex. In the final psychological phase of his camp experience, Frankl describes the strange and unsettling feelings that followed liberation. One might expect overwhelming happiness, but instead, most survivors felt emptiness, numbness, and confusion. He calls this stage depersonalization. After years of being treated as less than human, freedom didn't bring an instant return to normal life. The prisoners had become so used to suffering, so conditioned to suppression, that they struggled to feel anything at all. Frankl describes how he and others would walk through fields after the camp gates opened, yet feel nothing, no tears, no laughter, just a blankness. Some even felt guilty for surviving, especially when they thought of family and friends who had died. The mind, so long trapped in survival mode, had to relearn how to live. One particularly powerful moment comes when Frankl describes walking down a country road after his release. He saw flowers, the open sky, and the sunlight, and yet, his reaction was delayed. Only after a few steps did he finally fall to his knees, look up, and say aloud, "I called to the Lord from my narrow prison, and he answered me in the freedom of space." But even this moment was not pure joy. It was mixed with disbelief and exhaustion. The soul, he explains, does not heal instantly after prolonged imprisonment. Many survivors also faced the devastating discovery that their loved ones had not survived. Frankl himself had hoped to return to his wife, only to learn she had died in the camps. These realizations often crushed whatever fragile hope had been holding prisoners together. Frankl emphasizes an important insight here. Freedom is not just the removal of chains, it's the rebuilding of meaning. And that rebuilding takes time. Some former prisoners, unable to process their trauma, responded with bitterness or violence. Frankl recalls how one man, after being mistreated for years, beat a local farmer who had insulted him. It was an act of misplaced revenge, and Frankl saw it as a warning. Suffering does not automatically make a person better. It can also harden and distort the spirit, unless it is consciously transformed. Another challenge was reintegrating into society. Many survivors discovered that people outside the camps couldn't truly understand what they had endured. Conversations felt shallow. Daily life felt meaningless. It was as if they had returned to a world that had moved on without them. But Frankl believed that it was exactly at this point, after liberation, that the search for meaning became more important than ever. To heal, a survivor had to find a reason to keep living, to reconnect with values, purpose, and responsibility. He wrote, "Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning." But after liberation, the challenge was reversed. Now that the suffering had ended, what meaning would guide them forward? This final phase of the prisoner's psychological journey reveals the deepest truth of Frankl's experience. We are not just shaped by what happens to us, but by how we respond, even after the fact. Healing doesn't come from forgetting the pain. It comes from finding something worth living for again, even after everything has been taken. In the camps, Frankl had found meaning through love, hope, and inner freedom. After liberation, he discovered that meaning still had to be chosen, day by day, even in freedom. Why do we exist? What drives human behavior? In part 2 of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl introduces a powerful idea. Our deepest motivation in life is not pleasure or power, it's meaning. This is what he calls the will to meaning. Unlike Freud, who believed people are driven by the pursuit of pleasure, or Adler, who believed it's about power and control, Frankl saw something deeper: the human need to find purpose in life. When people can't find that purpose, they begin to suffer, not physically, but spiritually. This suffering often shows up as boredom, anxiety, depression, or even addiction. Frankl calls this existential frustration. You might see this in someone who has everything: a good job, a stable life, but still feels empty inside. That emptiness isn't laziness. It's a sign that they're missing something essential, a reason to wake up each day. Frankl argues that meaning cannot be given to us. It must be discovered by each person in their own life. This is where logotherapy comes in, Frankl's method of helping people find personal meaning, especially during times of crisis. He believed that when someone suffers, what they truly need is not medication or distraction. They need a reason to keep going. A purpose, a why. Frankl wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." That's the heart of the will to meaning. And it's not just about grand achievements or world-changing missions. Meaning can be found in simple things: in loving someone, in doing your work with care, or in facing suffering with dignity. When life feels unbearable, it's not always because it's too hard, it might be because it feels meaningless. But the good news? Meaning is always available, even in pain, even in loss. We just have to choose to look for it. Why do so many people feel empty, even when life seems fine? In this section, Viktor Frankl explores a powerful idea: existential frustration, the inner conflict that arises when we struggle to find meaning in our lives. Frankl observed that people today are not just battling mental illness, but something deeper, a crisis of meaning. He calls this the existential vacuum. You've probably seen it: the person who drowns themselves in work but still feels unsatisfied. The person who keeps busy with distractions, entertainment, shopping, social media, but secretly feels lost. They're not in physical pain. They're in spiritual pain, the pain of not knowing why they exist. Frankl says this emptiness isn't a flaw. It's a sign of how society has changed. In the past, people were guided by tradition, religion, or family roles. But in the modern world, we're free, yet also unsure of what to live for. Freedom without direction becomes paralysis. This frustration often shows up as boredom, depression, anxiety, or even addiction. Frankl called this a noogenic neurosis, a type of suffering that comes not from trauma or imbalance, but from a lack of meaning. His approach, logotherapy, doesn't focus on what's wrong with the mind, it focuses on what's missing in the soul. He believed that people don't just want to feel good, they want their lives to matter. And when that meaning is missing, people feel disconnected from themselves, from others, and from life itself. The key insight? Existential frustration is not a problem to be fixed. It's a signal to be heard. It's telling us, you are meant for something more. So instead of asking, what do I want from life? Frankl says we should ask, what does life expect of me? That's where real meaning begins. Have you ever felt like life is just empty? Viktor Frankl called this feeling the existential vacuum, a silent, creeping sense of meaninglessness that haunts many people, even when life looks normal on the outside. In today's world, we have more freedom than ever before, but that freedom comes with a price. In the past, people's roles were defined by religion, culture, or tradition. They didn't have to ask what their life was for, it was already decided. But now, we get to choose who we are, what we do, how we live, and while that sounds empowering, it also leaves many people feeling lost. Frankl explains that this vacuum, this inner void, shows up in many ways. Boredom, aimlessness, restlessness. People try to fill it with entertainment, substances, casual relationships, or endless work, but none of it truly satisfies. It's why someone can be surrounded by comfort and still feel miserable. Frankl calls this a modern crisis of the soul. It's not a medical disorder, it's a spiritual hunger. The pain of a life that feels directionless. He gives examples of people who came to him saying, "Doctor, I'm depressed," when what they really meant was, "Doctor, I don't know what I'm living for." Logotherapy, Frankl's method, doesn't try to mask this emptiness, it invites people to face it honestly. Because that vacuum isn't the end, it's the beginning. It's the space where meaning can be discovered. Frankl believed that every person has a unique purpose. Your job isn't to create it from scratch, it's to discover it through your actions, relationships, and response to life's challenges. So, if you've ever felt that dull ache of emptiness, you're not broken, you're being called to something deeper. The question is, will you listen? What if the cure for your suffering isn't inside you, but in what you live for? In this section, Viktor Frankl introduces the core of his method. Logotherapy, a form of therapy built on one powerful belief. Life has meaning under all circumstances. Unlike traditional psychotherapy, which focuses on the past and inner conflict, logotherapy focuses on the future, on what the patient still has to live for. Frankl explains that people are not just driven by instincts or emotions. They are spiritual beings, searching for purpose. When that search is blocked, people fall into despair. So, logotherapy asks a simple but life-changing question. What is the meaning of your life, right now? Frankl describes 3 key techniques in logotherapy. 1. Dereflection. Instead of obsessing over yourself and your problems, focus on something bigger, a goal, a person, a mission. Meaning is found by turning outward, not inward. 2. Paradoxical intention. This unusual method helps people overcome fear or anxiety by deliberately trying to do what they fear, and often, the fear loses its power. For example, someone afraid of sweating in public might try to sweat even more, and in doing so, their anxiety fades. 3. Socratic dialogue. Frankl believed the answers already exist within the person, so he asked guiding questions to help them uncover their own purpose. The therapist is not a teacher, but a mirror. Logotherapy is not about fixing people. It's about helping them find meaning, even in suffering, illness, or death. Frankl reminds us, people are not destroyed by pain, they're destroyed by pain without purpose. Once someone sees that their life still has meaning, even if they're in prison, facing loss, or near death, they come alive again. Hope returns, strength returns, because when a person finds their why, they can endure almost any how. What is the meaning of life? Viktor Frankl says, there isn't just one universal meaning. Instead, each person must discover their own unique purpose, and that purpose can change from moment to moment. Life is like a series of questions, and you are the one being asked. Frankl writes, it is life that asks us the questions. Our job is to answer, with our actions, our decisions, and our courage. So how do we find meaning? Frankl outlines 3 main sources of meaning. 1. Through work or achievement. You can find meaning by creating something, a project, a business, a work of art. or even just doing your job with passion and responsibility. It's about contributing something valuable to the world. 2. Through love and relationships. Loving another person, deeply, selflessly, can give life powerful meaning. Frankl believed love allows us to see the full potential in someone else. It lifts us beyond ourselves. 3. Through suffering. When it's unavoidable, when pain cannot be avoided, we still have a choice: how to respond to it. Even in the face of loss, illness, or hardship, we can choose to endure with dignity. This doesn't glorify suffering, it simply recognizes that even suffering can be meaningful if we face it with the right attitude. Frankl tells us, meaning isn't something we invent, it's something we detect. It's already out there, waiting to be discovered in every moment of our lives. And most importantly, meaning isn't limited to huge accomplishments. It can be found in small, quiet moments, in helping a stranger, in comforting a friend, in doing the right thing when no one is watching. So if you're feeling lost, don't ask, what do I want from life? Instead, ask, what is life asking of me right now? Because the answer to that question might just change everything. What makes life truly meaningful? According to Viktor Frankl, the essence of existence lies in this truth: life has meaning under all conditions, even the worst ones. This is not just a hopeful idea. It's a radical declaration based on Frankl's own experience surviving Nazi concentration camps. He saw people stripped of everything: possessions, freedom, dignity, yet still able to find purpose. Frankl believed that humans are not defined by their circumstances, but by their response to those circumstances. In this section, he introduces the idea of tragic optimism, the ability to say yes to life despite pain, guilt, and death. He explains that life's three unavoidable realities are: pain, because suffering is part of being human; guilt, because we all make moral choices, and sometimes we fail; death, because life is finite. But here's the key: each of these can be transformed. Suffering can lead to growth. Guilt can lead to change. Death can motivate us to live more fully, more urgently. Frankl writes, what matters is not the meaning of life in general, but the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. Even in a moment of tragedy, we can choose our attitude, and in that choice lies our power. Frankl warns against a society obsessed with happiness and comfort. He says that people don't just need a reason to feel good, they need a reason to be. Meaning isn't found in avoiding pain, but in rising above it. The essence of existence, then, is this: you are free to choose your attitude, your values, your response, no matter what. And through that freedom, even a life filled with suffering can become a life filled with purpose. Is there a meaning to life, even when we can't see it? In this final section, Viktor Frankl introduces the idea of the super meaning, a level of meaning that goes beyond our human understanding. He writes that sometimes, no matter how hard we search, we can't fully grasp why something happens, especially suffering, tragedy, or loss. But that doesn't mean it's meaningless. Frankl compares it to watching a great painting up close. When you stand too near, all you see are messy brushstrokes. But when you step back, the bigger picture is revealed. He believed that life often works the same way. From our limited human view, things may seem chaotic or unfair, but from a wider perspective, maybe even a spiritual one, there may be a deeper purpose at work. Frankl doesn't push any specific religion, but he does say that faith in a greater meaning, in something beyond ourselves, can help us endure what feels unbearable. He calls this trust in meaning we can't yet see, the super meaning. And here's the powerful part: you don't need to understand the whole story to keep going. You just need to believe that your life still has value, even when the reason isn't clear. Frankl writes, the ultimate meaning necessarily exceeds and surpasses the finite intellectual capacities of man. In other words, we may never know why things happen the way they do, but we can still choose how we respond. We can still choose love over bitterness, courage over fear, purpose over despair, and maybe, in doing so, we come a little closer to that greater meaning. So if you're facing something painful or confusing right now, remember, you don't need all the answers. You just need one reason to keep moving forward. That reason, that spark of hope, might be the beginning of your own super meaning. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl reminds us that life's purpose is not something we find in comfort or success alone. It's something we discover through our choices, especially in the face of pain, suffering, and uncertainty. Whether through our work, our relationships, or our response to hardship, each moment carries an opportunity to find meaning. And as Frankl shows us, even in the darkest times, we have the power to choose our attitude and find purpose. If you found this summary insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more book summaries and meaningful content every week. Also, let us know in the comments, what's one way you found meaning in your own life? Remember, life may not always be easy, but it's always meaningful if we choose to see it that way.